Is it on? It's so good to be back here, Harvest Church, and just so lovely. You know, you're the church that sent us, and that is just so special to us. And please be seated. Look, just to start from the start, you know, when I first heard about the country of Georgia, I don't think I had a clue where it was. So, Matt, can you tell everyone, why is Georgia so hard to find on a map?
Yeah, so some of us may have heard us speak before and some haven't, and even if you've forgotten, I have a map for you. So you don't need to feel ashamed if you don't know where Georgia is. And then you just go to the next one. That's it. So here we are. Can you work out where that is? So, Georgia is not in Europe. It's not in Eastern Europe. Lots of people say it is, but it's actually in this weird in-between region called the Caucasus. That's where the circle is. So the countries of Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia make up the Caucasus. Georgia used to be part of the Soviet Union, so when you're in Georgia, it has that kind of feel of an ex-Soviet country, of Soviet apartment blocks. And you've probably heard of Stalin. Well, he was a Georgian, and so their favourite export for some people. Yeah, certainly you can go to a museum that tells you all about how great Stalin is, or was, not really. Yeah, so, and speaking of terrible leaders, the war has been going on in Ukraine and between Ukraine and Russia for more than 4 years now, and so we've heard a lot about that war. That's had a big impact on us in Georgia because many hundreds of thousands of Russian-speaking people have come into Georgia seeking to get away from that situation in different ways. And we'll tell you more about that in a minute. And to the south we have Iran. And then so when I first picked this map, I wasn't thinking about Iran, and then that's all happened. And so, Georgia is an interesting place because, you know, really we do actually have peace in Georgia. So we're surrounded by lots of different conflict and lots of different, bad things going on. But in Georgia, it's pretty safe. Georgia is also an interesting country because it's an open doorway into a region which is quite closed to the gospel. And so in many of the surrounding countries, in southern Russia, we have Chechnya, and then in Turkey and Azerbaijan, Iran, you know, Muslim regions where, you know, there's a lot of restrictions on Christians, there's a lot of persecution. And we wouldn't be able to do many of the things that we are able to do in Georgia. And so, we felt that God specifically called us to Georgia, and we have continued to see that we have opportunities and open doors in that country. You can go to the next one. So I told you Georgia was safe. This is on the beach across the road from our house, actually. So there was a sea mine floating. You know, there were lots of sea mines around Ukraine, and a few of them floated down and hit Turkey. And then one came all the way to Batumi and hit the beach and exploded. I didn't take that photo. But no, in general, Georgia is pretty safe. We don't hear, you know, planes from the war. We don't hear bombs, that kind of thing. Next one. We live in the city of Batumi. And this photo, I like this photo because Batumi is interesting that it's Russians consider it a resort town. And it is on the beach. You can go and have a beach holiday, but it's kind of also not all shiny, as Alison and Brian can tell you because they visited us. Not all shiny and clean, that's for sure. And so we've been in the city of Batumi for 8.5 years. And let's go to the next one. And Beth's going to tell you more about how we came to be in Georgia.
Well, I think it always starts with a call, doesn't it? And Matt really felt from a young age that he was called to be a missionary. And when we first met in the Riverland and we started dating, he shared that with me. And in fact, it come to my attention because he had gone on a short-term trip to China just for 4 weeks, and I'd missed him at church. And then after that, we started dating. And as I started dating Matt and I accepted that, you know, we would be going overseas as missionaries, I remembered that when I'd been a child, our whole Sunday school had been called up the front of our church, and a man had come and prophesied over the life of every child. And I remember waiting there thinking, what's he going to say to me? What's he going to say to me? And he said to me, you're going to be a missionary. And at the time, I was so relieved because I didn't want to be a pastor's wife like my mum. So fast forward, we did as a family spend a year in China, And then when we were in China and it was time for us to leave, we were sort of praying about our future. We were planning to go to Japan. We felt I just felt a lack of peace about that decision. And Matt got this job advertisement for the job in Horsham. And it was like God had written this job for him because it included everything that he'd ever done and, things that seemed random and disconnected, and they were all in this one job ad. And so we felt, okay, God wants us to apply. So we came to Horsham, and we were here, obviously, in Harvest Church, where we had our third child, our little Victorian, Josie. And then after a while, we were here for 6 years, but Matt felt, it's time. It's time we start to look overseas. And so the world is a big place, and there are many different things that you can do overseas, but we just started to pray for God's direction. And as we, where did he want us? And then, I don't know if some of you perhaps know Chad Irons, but he came and visited our church, and he put a brochure for the Pan Asia Conference out on in the foyer. And that's the missions conference of ACC. And so I just picked up that brochure. We heard about the missions conference, and God brought everything together so we could go. And when we went to that missions conference, we met the team in Georgia, and God just really confirmed to us that's where we were to go. Now, it did take some time, but eventually we moved overseas, and our kids at that time were 5, 7, and 9. So it was a huge move for them. So they came from Horsham, where they had this really great church, really just great, excellent Sunday school and great school, kindy, good friends. And we went and we lived in a Muslim village in Georgia where everyone spoke Georgian and we only spoke English. And it was very isolating. It was a big change. And the kids went to Georgian school. No, the older two, Josie was still with me at that stage because she was younger. And, the kids didn't pick up Georgian overnight and suddenly start speaking. It took a little bit longer than that. Matt, why don't you tell everyone why Georgian is just so hard to learn?
Yeah, you can see the next one. And so I told you that Georgia is a small country and it's surrounded by lots of other countries, all with their own cultures and languages. So really in Georgia, it's not just one language. We kind of live in a bit of a language soup. And over the years, we found ourselves doing ministry to people who have come from other places, foreigners and strangers in Georgia. And so these are some of the languages that we have in the Caucasus region. Do you know which one's Georgian? Some of you should know.
Brian should know.
On the top left? Yeah, well done, Denise. She's good marks. So that's the Georgian language. It looks a bit like if you threw spaghetti on the wall and what was left is the letters of the Georgian alphabet. And then going around we have Turkish, written in the Latin script, and then on the right-hand side is Russian. And so we have a church that we've been involved in since the beginning, and it has become a Russian English congregation. And we'll tell you a bit more about that later. And so all of us as a family have had friends who speak Russian. And on the bottom right is the Kurdish language. And we're going to tell you more about a ministry to a Kurdish-speaking minority that we have in Batumi. And then on the bottom left is Armenian, which looks a bit like Georgian but is completely unrelated to Georgian. Just the squiggles, the aspect of the squiggles is just coincidence, really. Yeah, so Georgian is a very hard language. It's actually famous amongst linguists for being really hard. The pronunciation is really hard. The grammar is just incredibly complex. I always say someone needs to come through with a red pen and just get rid of all the terrible things in the language that make it very hard to speak. But our kids have been in Georgian school for 7 years. And then, as a family, we've learned Georgian. And so it's been... it's a part of the process, and when you're overseas, living in a place where not many people speak English, it's just, your reality. You have to spend a lot of time and hard work language learning. So that's been a big part of our story over there. And so I mentioned that we do have a lot of ministries to foreigners, and Beck's going to share a bit more about how that came about.
I think when you read the scriptures, you see how Jesus would walk the streets, and then he would have compassion on people and individuals. And as we were foreigners in Batumi and just walking the streets, I think God just stirs compassion into you for the people that he wants you to reach. And so what really stood out to us was these children that beg on the streets. So you go, you're driving in your car and you're waiting at an intersection and you hear a tap, tap, tap on your car window and there's a child asking for money. Or you go to the shopping mall and just outside the shopping mall, there's a kid curled up on a piece of cardboard with a little bowl in front of them. And the kids can be really young too. And you look and you don't see any sort of supervising adult anywhere near in sight. So these are not our photos because we follow all the protocols, but this is what it looks like, children. And so we had compassion and we started to pray, but we felt very much like we're foreigners. We don't understand anything about what's going on here. And so we just sort of waited and prayed. And then over time, as we started to ask questions, we learned that they were not Georgian children, that they were Kurdish. Matt, can you share who the Kurds are?
Yeah, you can go to the next one. So who are the Kurds? It's a question that lots of people ask. The Kurds are actually the largest people group in the world without a nation of their own. These days, because of the Iraq war, there is now a part of Iraq which is called Kurdistan, but it's not its own country. The Kurds are a Muslim people group. They're also an unreached people group, which means there isn't a Christian community of Kurdish people who are capable of reaching their own people for Christ. And so the Kurds' homeland is in the mountainous region between Iran, Iraq, Syria and Turkey, and about half the Kurds live in Turkey. They also, it's not shown on this map, but they're also into the Soviet Union as well, into Georgia and Azerbaijan and other parts of the Soviet Union. They're also Kurdish people. And partly because, this is a region with a lot of conflict. The war with ISIS happened in this region, and so there are Kurds spread around the world. And then in many of the places they live, they face repression because a lot of them are activists for freedom. In Turkey, for a whole generation, it was illegal for them to speak their language. So if they were on the street, they couldn't speak their home language. They would get arrested for that. And still in Turkey, it's very sensitive. Anything that involves Kurdish people, anything that involves a group of Kurds getting together, speaking their languages, is very sensitive because there are terrorists who are Kurds. And if you heard about bombs in Ankara and other places in Turkey, they were Kurdish terrorists. And so, the average, and still to this day, young Turkish people, they hate, or they've sort of trained to hate Kurdish people. And so, having a ministry to Kurdish-speaking people is not very practical in Turkey. And so, what we do in Georgia is more possible, as I was saying. And when we saw these kids on the street, we knew they spoke Kurdish, but we didn't even know, do they speak Georgian? And it turns out they do, so we speak to them in Georgian. But we didn't even know what was happening with them and who was helping them.
Yeah, we discovered actually no one was helping them. So the government just ignored them, and then there was no other church or organisation reaching out to them. So 3.5 years later, after praying for 3.5 years later, one of the young missionary girls on my team, Gulnaz, was out at the beach. It was down at the beach with her friends from church, and they were just picnicking. And a group of these kids came up to steal from them. And Gulnaz looked at one of the teenage girls and just had this compassion for her. And she went up to her and hugged her. And then this girl's face changed. And they ended up having this sort of positive interaction with these children. And then Gulnaz came back to me and said, Rebekah, we must do something. Enough of praying, let's do something. And by this stage, we were pastors of the church. We had our own church building. And so I said, okay, let's do it. And at that stage, there were just 5 of us missionary ladies. We had varying degrees and different types of languages among us. None of us spoke Kurdish, but we just felt, let's just go. So every Wednesday we just started to go out onto the streets and invite the kids to come back. And so the first time we went out, we met with them, we talked to them, we invited them, but they didn't come. And then the next Wednesday we went back out again and we talked to them and we invited them to come back, and they didn't come. And it took some time before they came to trust us and come to our building. But when they finally did come, And we started to feed them, and we started to, we gave them food, and we got them to colour in and play games with them. Soon it became really apparent that they didn't need a kids program because they couldn't read or write or do maths, and they were growing up completely illiterate. And we had the mothers coming too, and one mother said, "All I want is to be able to sign my name on a government form instead of writing X." So we just started from there, just teaching them just at the level that they were at. Now, those that had come from Azerbaijan and had been in school in Azerbaijan had a little bit more, but those that had grown up in Georgia had nothing. And so we just started, and then, from there we grew into a part-time school, which we run 3 days a week, picking them up and just training them and feeding them and supporting them in the best way that we can. But what we did notice is the teenage boys really needed something more. Matt, can you explain?
Yeah, before we move on, you can see Samuel here, one of our teachers. Samuel and James are actually some of our best teachers because they speak Georgian really well and get on with the kids really well. Yeah, and you can also see in this, you might notice in this picture, a lot of the kids are boys, and that's not an accident because the life of the girls is a lot more controlled, and the girls have a whole future of begging ahead of them. So, yeah, the families are a little bit more controlling of the girls. And we would see with the boys that they would grow up and they would become an older teenager, and then they would stop begging because people don't give to 17-year-olds very much. And then they would come to a life of doing nothing, and the men would sit around doing nothing while their wives and children support them. So you can go to the next one. So, we wanted to do something about that, and so I'd been feeling a burden for a while that I wanted to start a business as a way to get kids involved in some real work. And so 2 years ago, we started this microgreens business. Have you heard of microgreens? Like little sprouts. And we sell them into hotels and restaurants and organic stores in our city. And I have a background in agriculture, so I was sort of interested in that kind of thing. And it was something that we could do in the city. We do it in a spare room in our school. And you go to the next one. And so those boys come in, and some of them are working alongside me, and it's about whole of life discipleship, that not just about education and stories about Jesus, which we do, but it's about learning to turn up every day to work and seeing the value of their own labour. And there's one more. I've had a few different boys working for me. This guy Jamal, actually, he's in the foster care system, and he's got moved on. At the moment, now that I'm here in Australia, I just have one boy who's working for a friend who's running the business. But yeah, it's been great. It's sort of changed my role a little bit in the community, that I'm not just like Matthew the teacher, but I'm Matthew who owns a business, and then they see that as someone who's actually functional and doing something that they can tangibly see, not just a fake business. Like a lot of missionaries get involved in sending things back to America or something like that. But the problem with those is it's hard for them to really see what's going on. But this is a real business where we have real local customers, and it's been great. And Emil is the one in white, and he's one who has learned to read at our school. He can read in 2 languages now. And he's now going to a bit of a school program. When I started employing him 2 years ago, he was still a beggar. Sometimes I would go to his house and say, he's not here, and I'd have to hunt him down in the city and find him somewhere at a traffic light to bring him to work. But he's really caught the vision for it. He tells me, I don't really instruct him, and he just tells me, Matt, when I grow up, I want to be a husband who supports my wife and supports my kids. I want to have a job so they don't have to do what I had to do. And life is hard. He lives in a garage with his family. They live all together. They sleep on the floor. His dad and his sisters, they're all beggars still. But yeah, he has a different vision, for his future, which is what we've aimed for the last few years. We gave up. I put a good effort in trying to get some of the older men working and that, but I gave up a few years ago. And it was, too much banging my head against the wall. But with the young boys, we see something quite a different attitude, and they're teachable and they want to learn, and and it's great. We're going to move on now. One more slide to a different part of our ministry. So it's a little bit of a confusing story, the church story. Beck just mentioned that we were pastors, and yeah, it's a church that we've been involved. It wasn't something that we went to Georgia with the idea that we were going to start a church, but we were there, right at the beginning of a little church plant. And last time we were here in Australia, we were leading that church, and Beck's going to tell you a little bit more about how some of that happened.
Yeah, so we were involved in this little English fellowship, which our kids just really needed with all of the Georgian in their life. And then the guy that started it, well, he died, which was quite unexpected. And then after that period of time, we just felt that it was time, Matt in particular really felt it was time for us to become pastors of that church and to lead it on. And as we led that fellowship, it also came time to add the Russian language. And then once we added the Russian language, our church grew exponentially. We had so many Russian speakers, but we were suddenly pastors of a church where 60% of the people's first language was a language we did not speak. And we really felt that God had called us to learn Georgian. We felt that God had called us to have a ministry to the Kurdish. And we didn't feel like we were called to become the pastors of Russians, particularly because there were many other more qualified, people that could already speak the language to do that. And so it just came time to pass that church on, and we were praying who to pass it on to. And it was a bit messy, but in the end, we were able to pass the church over to Matt's best friend, Victor, and he just took that on. And so he had been with us the whole journey, really, but he had not felt called to be a pastor. He didn't think it was for him. He didn't think he was qualified enough or good enough, but God just grew him over the years, and now he just has this anointing to lead the church. And it's just such a blessing for us, and he obviously speaks Russian and English, and he loves the church. And I think in some ways that's the best qualification, isn't it? And so Matt feels very strongly that his role is to support Victor in being the best pastor he can be. So Matt does everything from preaching to vacuuming and locking up the church, which is what pastors need. Pastors need, like Aaron and her lifted up the arms of Moses. And pastors need those kind of people that lift up their arms. And so we'd also, when we came into the city of Batumi, our team leader had this vision of multiple congregations being raised up with different languages. And so while Matt is still very much supporting Victor, one of the things that God gave me a vision for were 100 Indian medical students to be worshipping God in Batumi. And as I was praying into that vision over years, and sometimes these things just seem to take time, God brought this Indian medical student to us, and he said, can I just start an Indian medical group, student group? And so that has now developed into a church congregation that meets. They speak, their main language is Malayalam and also English, and I am the supporting pastor for that. So they run it all, and I'm just there to support them. But I just really feel like in doing this, we're keeping with the vision that was already set down. Now, Matt, do you want to just talk a little bit?
Yeah, so one of the other... Sorry, two different things happening at once.
He's very keen.
Yeah. It's actually, the business didn't... We were leading the church, and, we felt like God had called us to that, but then when we passed it on, the business started and a bunch of other things happened, and we saw that, God's hand was on it, and it was nice to have time to do some of those things. These days, we also run an English club, and it's one of the main outreaches of our church, so especially since the war, there are many people who are very keen to learn English. They're very keen to, have other opportunities, especially the Russian-speaking people. And so Beck and I lead an English club. It's a Monday night where people come along. And it's because the war's been going on for so long that there are just people that have been in Batumi for a long time, and we've built up a community of 40 to 50 students who come each week. And we spend the first half, practicing English in conversational kind of style. And in the second half, we take a passage of the Bible. And so we sit, depending on their level, and we sit and have a little Bible study together. So I tell them we're going to use the Bible as a text to learn English. And early on, some people would go home before that. They didn't want to study the Bible. But these days, most people stay. and we use the Bible and we sit around with mostly unchurched people, reading the Bible together and talking about what it means, what it tells us about God, what it tells us about ourselves, and these kind of things. The guy in yellow, his name is Anton, and he's a good example of fruit of that ministry. And Anton's story is a nice one, and I love the stories where God is already working in someone's life well before we met them. So Anton was living in Moscow. He was a journalist, but he hates Putin, and if you want to get him fired up, you can ask him about Putin. And as soon as the war started, he left Russia. But back in Russia, he had been diagnosed with MS. And he often says he had this disability card because he had paralysis in parts of his body because of the disease. And so he wasn't able to work very much and he was disabled. But he says that when he came into Georgia, he looked up at a church on the mountain and he felt that God began to heal him. And he says that now. He wasn't a Christian. He'd had some experiences in the Orthodox Church, but atheistic university had sort of beaten it out of him. And he wasn't following God at all. But he had that experience, and then about maybe a year after that, he started coming to our English club. He didn't speak English much at the beginning, and then we sort of got to know him slowly. He was coming for probably 2 years. And he reached a point of crisis in his life, and these interesting spiritual things just started happening. Some of them were a bit weird, but he just became really open to God, and he came along to church, and he loved it. He said, "Oh, this is great." And he just wanted to learn anything that we had to tell him. And so we decided to run an Alpha course, and we offered the Alpha course to people from the English club. And that's top right is one of the two groups that we had. Yeah, and it was a great time where we did the Alpha course together. And there's a part of the Alpha course where it talks about healing. And actually God continued to heal Anton. Not actually through the Alpha course. God was just doing it in his life. And he's able to run now. He can run 10 kilometres and he runs multiple times a week. And when we were talking about it in the Alpha course, he was like, "Yeah, I used to be disabled. I had MS, but God healed me. Look, he healed me." It's just he's matter of fact about it. Yeah. And so Anton is a special person for us also because he looks after our dog that we've had for 7 years. And so he takes our dog running. He's also serving. He's driving the minivan to pick up the kids in the Kurdish school now, so taking on that role from me. And it's wonderful to see how God has just worked in his life. That baptism reminds me of another one, and Beck's going to share about the ministry to women that she has in Batumi.
Yes, so when we first arrived in Georgia, we were still living in the village, and we had this short-term team visit us, and they were from America. And one of the girls just noticed all of the massage parlours in the area that she was living, and so she decided to just visit every single one of them. And she visited every single one of them, and she found the two that were open to connecting with her. And she was sharing with them about Jesus. And so when she left after her month, she said to me, "Rebekah, can you follow up these two shops?" And at the stage, I was, living in the village, driving into Batumi sort of, off and on. And I said, "Okay." And I had no idea what I was doing, but I thought, okay, I can just go and visit them, right? And I went with my daughter, my 5-year-old daughter at the time, which is not what I recommend now, but anyhow. And so I went to these two shops and I thought, in one of them, the lady's not that friendly. So I'll just go to the other shop. And anyway, I started to go to that shop and just go regularly and to pray with the women and share with them about Jesus. And then over time, God has given me a team and we go, it's such a changing environment, as in shops open, shops close, ladies come, ladies go. The police are there deporting people or shutting things down. And so every time we go into a shop, we don't know if it's the last time that we will see these ladies and have an opportunity to share about Jesus with them. And they are, in many, many ways, trapped. So unless that they're the boss of the shop, they don't have the freedom to come to church, and they don't even have the freedom to necessarily meet you for coffee unless the boss says so. And so us going to them is the only way that they can hear about Jesus. And so I just find in some ways it's you know what, it's a ministry that brings me joy because I feel like the Holy Spirit goes with me. And it is a lot of seed sowing, as in we're starting to do Bible stories with someone and then they vanish and you just can't find them again. But we did have, we had one lady that we met in 2019 and we got to know her and to walk with her and to share Christ with her. And over time she opened up and she said, you know, Rebekah, I believe that before I came to Georgia, God gave me a dream. And in that dream, he told me I'd become a Christian in Georgia. And so she, her life was messy, just really messy. But she did come, she came to faith in Christ. She wanted to be baptized. And so last summer we had the opportunity of baptizing her. Her life was still a mess and it was complicated. And it's so complicated, I didn't have any wisdom to get her out of it. But we just prayed and God really just intervened. He got the government to detain her and to send her home. And she had passport issues, she had money issues. But her mother was dying and she didn't realise that her mother was dying. But she got home in time to say goodbye to her mother. And she was just so grateful that God had arranged that and got her there to say goodbye. And so, and this is the joy of just sharing Christ with people. They can be taken from your life so quickly, but you have this time right now to speak. Now, Matt, we are doing a couple of things in Georgia. Yeah. Can you tell us how we're able to leave everything and come to Australia?
Yeah, so we're here for about half a year in Australia right now, and we spent most of last year worried and thinking, my goodness, how are we going to do that? And how are we going to leave all of this for 6 months? But yeah, God is faithful. And as we have continually seen throughout our time, that God provides sometimes quite miraculously co-workers and team members that we need. And so God has done that. The school, there's a young lady called Tess in the middle, and she's a teacher from Australia. And it didn't seem like she was serving with us before, but she was back in Australia. It didn't seem like she could come, but God made a way and she's come back and she's running the school right now. So pray for Tess. She needs it because it's not an easy ministry. The kids are pretty wild. You can imagine if you took a bunch of kids and sent them out every day to do whatever they want, really. They're pretty wild and they don't sit still very well. And they fight a lot and it's difficult. And then we have Alison and Brian who came and visited us last year. And there's many, many stories we could tell of, how God has brought people onto the team to help us. So we're doing a lot of things, but we're also, not doing it alone.
Yes.
And so, and that encourages us. And so Beck's going to finish off today with a word that I think, encourages us all here in Australia.
I'd like to just finish with this scripture, Deuteronomy 10:17-20. For the Lord your God is the God of gods and the Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality and accepts no bribes. He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and he loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. And you are to love those who are foreigners, for you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt. And just as I was praying about what to share, I just felt like God gave me 2 words. And one was faithfulness. So if you are serving God now in a ministry, in this church or in outreach, I guess, I just encourage you to be faithful. When we started doing the English fellowship, week in, week out, we would go and the numbers would be small. But as we stayed and we were faithful to what God had called us to do, he brought the fruit and he brought the increase. So, just encourage you to do that. And then secondly, just compassion would be my second word, compassion. Who do you have compassion on? Because when God stirs this heart of compassion in you for someone, I just encourage you to firstly pray, but then also to ask God, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to reach out to this person? Okay. And Matt, can you just tell everyone quickly what's next for us?
Yeah, so the future's looking a little bit different for us. So James is about to turn 18, our oldest, and so he's had a one-way ticket back to Australia and he's going to be staying here to finish year 12 and go to uni. So when we go back in the middle of the year. It'll be a bit different for us. And yeah. So pray for Rebekah in that. She will suffer the most. But as Ruth said before, you know that we are here in partnership with you, and so we would love to connect with you today. So please, come and don't be shy. Come and chat to us. We'd love to connect with you today. If you'd like to follow more closely, you can put your email address down out in the foyer, and you can get our emails and talk about what we do and everything. And we also have some microgreen samples, some sunflower microgreens out there. So if you want to try some, I've got a whole box left, so you can eat as much as you want. And thank you so much for having us today.
How good was that? We so honour you guys. When Aaron saw Matt yesterday, he said, honour where honour's due. And I just think, why don't we just stand up again? And we are going to pray for them, but why don't we just give them a massive hand?